Okay, so Sabina Jupiter is your third book.
Yeah.
But my first question, I didn't get a chance to read your second book, but I read your first book, and my first question to you is how conscious you are of exploring the same theme in multiple books. Whether there is one central question that is important to you as an artist that you keep returning to in your books, and what that theme is in your estimation.
I don't think I start out with themes at all. I generally start out thinking of characters. Particular characters start knocking inside my head, rustling about as though they exist somewhere and I need to reach them. And I'm aware that there are common themes in each of these books. Loss is one of them, which is a very strong theme that runs through the loss of the environment and forests and animals in the folded earth, the loss of home and family in Atlas of Impossible Longing, and loss of different kinds in Jupiter. So I know it's there, but it's not as though I start out thinking that this is what I'm going to write.
Is it interesting to you as an artist to think of yourself as engaged in that kind of pursuit, a pursuit that's more philosophical, or is your interest as an artist in just digging into the stuff of fiction, which is people and places?
I think my interest is just in telling a really good story.
Yeah.
I love the sense of I make up the places that I'm in my book as well. It's not only the people. And I love the sense of this whole universe coming alive as I write it. And through the writing of the first draft, it's just mine. It's nobody else's. No one knows these people or places exist. And it's like a kind of secret flame inside me, which just is there. And once, of course, somebody has read the first draft, then it changes a bit somehow.
Right.
But my interest is really in creating a world that sucks people in emotionally as well as at the level of their intellect completely.
Which you do very well, and you do. It's funny to hear you talk about the sort of micro level of the character, because you, as a writer, are extremely adept at plot, which is something that always feels like the more mathematical aspect of writing a novel to me. Like, it's the sort of grandeur aspect that is somehow divorced from creativity. But Sleeping on Jupiter, the premise of the book is so complex that it actually defies easy summary, but essentially in Sleeping on Jupiter, these three older women are on holiday in a small seaside town in India that has a specific kind of sacred resonance is up there. It's a temple town. They've come on holiday, and at the same time you have this other plot of a young woman arriving in India from Scandinavia, and the reasons that she is in the town are very different, and these two stories intersect in very complicated ways that are not immediately clear, but when they become clear, it's incredibly rewarding. And the only reason I bring this up is because I really marvel at it as a writer to set something so complicated in motion. When I was reading it, I was like, I don't understand how she did this. I don't understand how she did it. And I tried to picture you with lots of index cards or something in your office trying to figure out how everybody does, the complex choreography. And is that the case? Is the form that it ultimately takes, is that something that you think comes naturally to you?
This stuff you said about the making of the plot, which is parts of which are very mechanical, like how do you get somebody from here to there, or whatever it is. And Atlas, the first book, is set over a span of, from the 20s to the 50s, so it was about a 35-year span of time. And after I had finished, I'm bad at maths, so even to keep track of who is growing, their ages, where they are heading together, what age is X when I left him. I thought, okay, never again. So the Jupiter is set over 5 days.
Well, but that's not totally true, is it?
But you would think that would make it easier. But because there are flashbacks to this, Jupiter is basically about, as you said, these three women go on holiday to a seaside town, but the action is divided between four women, these three and a young girl whom they meet on the train. And three men who are locals. There's a temple guide who's desperately in love with a rent boy. And this conflicts quite intensely with his religious world, where all of this is completely not, it's forbidden. And there's a tea man who seems to be a kind of drifter and a refugee, or we don't know where he's come from. And all he has is snatches of his past that he sings out as songs while he sells his tea. And the fourth man is an outsider again, who is a photographer with whom this girl has set up work. So these four people's lives intersect on this beach and in the town, which is a temple town. And an Indian temple town is a town where there's a massive old temple around which the whole life of the town revolves. People either are employed by it, or people are visiting it, or it's just there and everything happens around it. So religion is central to the novel as well. And as these lives intersect, they change each other. And the girl has come to excavate her past. She's been through things in her, she's not even sure that those things happened in this particular town, but she thinks they did. And she's come to find fragments of herself.
I mean, to hear you describe this plot, it sounds, to me, as a writer, so unwieldy. It sounds like juggling 8 balls instead of juggling 3, and juggling 3 is hard enough. And yet, you manage, you do it very well. You do it in a book that's actually quite slender, considering the space that it occupies. And one of the things that I like the most is that even though you set this sort of complicated plot in motion, you don't necessarily answer every question. There's a lot that we know.
Did that really bug you?
No, that's one of the things that I liked about it. But when I worked in publishing, when I worked in magazines, my boss would always say to us, we would get into the room and we would all sort of give our opinions, and my boss would say, well, no one cares what your opinion is, because you work in a magazine, so you know how this works. So as a writer, I feel like I'm a bad reader, where I love the books that don't answer questions. And I can imagine a reader who is frustrated by that, but to me, it felt akin to how life works, where you don't get the answers to every question that you have in your life. And I felt that Atlas and Jupiter shared this sense that it was solving the complex problem of the plot without really answering the larger questions it was raising. I'm not even asking a question, I'm just babbling. But I do have a question for you. So the 3 ladies in this book, who are they're not quite pilgrims, they're holiday goers. They're older women. They've known each other for a long time. One of the women is prone in her old age to sort of forgetfulness. It doesn't feel quite dire and medical. It feels like it may be the beginning of her decline into old age. In Atlas of Impossible Longing, there is a matriarch in this family that is it's quite a broken family, and this woman, when she is still quite young, similarly slides into what feels like is a dementia-related Tourette's almost.
She becomes foul-mouthed.
Yes, she becomes extremely and very, very deliciously foul-mouthed. She says these really terrible, terrible things. And I was wondering if there was something for you about, so when I saw that commonality, I thought, is there something to you that is liberating about old age? That something falls away, and that these women, I mean, again, the matriarch in Atlas is not even that old, but that at a certain point these women are liberated by what seems like an illness.
I've been, that's an interesting question. And that's absolutely true, because in Atlas, the old woman, one fine morning starts calling people the most horrible names. She thinks up good ones.
It's worth reading just for the insults that she comes up with.
But it really is a whole lifetime of being caged, that the cage suddenly opens when she gives herself this freedom to be wildly unpredictable. Nobody can stop her, because they think she's gone nuts. And we don't know whether she's lost it or whether she's just decided, I don't care. I'll say exactly what I please. So she does share that with one of the women in this book. And in this book, the woman who is starting to lose bits of herself and forget things, supposedly, is actually the one who has the most fun. She goes off wandering on the beach when she pleases.
Is she the one who plays the vodka?
No.
No, it's not, right.
But this book is very much like Rumaan's book. Rumaan's book is about friendship between two young women in, I was really struck by the way you got those. When I was walking down New York today for the first time, I kept looking at these women sitting at tables eating lunch together, thinking of them.
Thank you. That's so nice to hear.
So in my book, there are these three old women who are going on this holiday and they are friends, and the pulls and tugs, the irritations and so on of friendship are there, as are in your book.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
The trio at the sort of heart of Sleeping on Jupiter did remind me of
But
my
I wanted
characters.
to ask you in this book, about this book, whether you could have written, is male friendship and female friendship different?
Oh, men are so uninteresting, I think, compared to women. I don't know. I don't know that
Would you
male.
have written this about
I don't know what two men would talk about besides work or baseball. I just, there is a sort of, I think in this country, and this is actually in Indian society. However, even in modern Indian society, there is more of a natural tendency to divide by gender. And that you socialize, men socialize with men, women socialize with women, and that is the sort of, you maintain propriety that way, right? And when I was just in Atlanta, as I was saying, and we went to this country club. You can just imagine a country club in Atlanta. And all the men were on one side and all the women were on one side. And I said to my husband, this is like being in Tehran or something. Like, American society does this also. And maybe it's because I'm gay, but I was with the dads and I was like, well, what the hell am I supposed to talk about? I would rather not talk about these things. And here, I can sort of understand them a little better. And I think as a writer of fiction, it's easier for me to write about something that's further from me.
Yeah.
And you get to masquerade a lot more, you get to be a little more merciless and feel like you have that armor, that distance to write about something that's cool.
But I didn't feel while reading the book that it was. I was quite alarmed at the stuff that's in this book. How did you?
Well, I mean, I think that writing is such an amoral trait where you have to be willing to sort of spy on people and listen to people and sort of tell the worst truths about people.
Yeah.
And I think you do this, particularly in Atlas, actually, there is also a sense that I had of you as the writer kind of looking at something you weren't meant to be seeing. And people, in Atlas of Impossible Longing, the narrative is more structured around keeping of secrets over a long period of time. And there's a lot more sort of, the reader is sort of consciously looking in. And that's how I felt when I was writing my book, that I'm consciously kind of spying, But that's what you do, right? You have to make stuff up, and the best way to get stuff to make up is to spy on the people in your way.
Yeah, and you do, I've had questions, there is a fair amount of violence and also pedophilia in Sleeping on Jupiter. And at the very first reading, many people in audiences who come to readings think that you need to have experienced everything you've written about in order to write about them. So at this very first reading I did in Delhi from this book, which was at a country club library in a very wealthy area called Vasant Vihar. There was a kind of full of generals and their wives and so on. One of these general types came up to me while the tea and samosas were going around and said to me, I'm going to ask you this inside, so I thought I'd ask you outside to prepare you. And already my heart was sinking. And he said that the scenes to do with sex in this book are written with such, they are so convincing and so real. You would have had to experience those. And I thought, no, he's not going to ask me. But he did. And
what did you say?
I can lecture on, imagination and
Right.
the role of
Right.
transformative imagination, and I use for, force and will.
Right.
So that he was confused by the end of it.
It is true, though, that your book, which it feels like a narrative, it begins as a very innocent narrative in many ways of these sort of older ladies, and older ladies are often sort of desexualized, so it seems like a desexualized environment, because you think you're going to just be with this trio of old biddies, and then it sort of very, very quickly actually becomes, because there's that incident right at the start of the book that sort of foreshadows what's to come. And
shall I read out this?
Yeah, will you read that part?
You want me to? Fiona wanted. I always want to read a different part, and then I end up reading the same part. Shall I read a different part?
I like this part because I think because it comes at the beginning of the book and it really does get you sort of addicted to it. And I also feel like you'll be able to do the dialogue in your beautiful accent.
An hour, perhaps two, had gone by when they stopped at a station. Lights glowed outside. White neon dimmed to a sickly yellow by the train's tinted windows. People surged towards their coach, suitcases and bags in hand. Just outside their window was a tea stall. A tattered woman hung around near it, hoping for food. She wore a grimy sari petticoat and a too big man's shirt buttoned wrong. Her shapeless rags and matted hair somehow intensified the raw beauty of her face. Latika wanted immediately to get out of the train and rescue her before she came to harm. The woman was sidling up to the people on the platform, tugging a shirt in passing or nudging an arm, as though she thought that their revulsion at her touch would make them cough up a rupee or two. Everyone sidestepped her as she edged closer. When she went up to a stocky, thuggish-looking man and put a hand out towards him, wheedling him with a smile, Latika shut her eyes. She didn't want to look. She would never know anything more about this ragged woman in the murky haze of this platform, what became of her on it. Their train was just a parcel of people rushing through a landscape they had no connection to. Already too many snatches of other people's lives were stored inside her, the built-up sediments from which bits and pieces floated up at times into her dreams. When she opened her eyes, she had lost sight of the woman, and the girl in their compartment was standing up. She hoisted her backpack onto her shoulder. "Where are you going?" Vidya asked her. "Just to look around. Everyone's getting off anyway." The girl gestured at the aisle, the people walking up and down, leaving the train, some coming back with bottles of fizzy drinks. "But there's nothing to look at. How long will we stop here? Already so much of the stopping time is over." Vidya peered out. "I can't tell which station it is. Do you think it is Kathalbadi? Then it's not a long halt." The girl had disappeared into the aisle before Vidya was finished. They saw her reappear a minute or two later on the platform. Separated by window glass and a distance, she looked even more a foreigner. Gauri, who had just finished her evening prayers, put away her beads and opened her eyes. "What a thing to do," she said, "getting off a train. Is she buying food? I'd rather starve than take these risks." Latika laughed at the improbability of chubby, rosy-cheeked Gauri either starving or taking risks. "That would be the day. I'm sure you're thinking of dinner already." The girl went towards the stall, jostled by crowds. Everyone was pushing at each other to get on the train or buy food at the stall before the train left. She was surrounded by men ogling her braided hair and ringed ears, and the curves outlined in turquoise by her t-shirt. Inside the train, the women were shielded from all the noise and shouting on the platform, but they could see her lips move. She looked smaller and slighter among the men and had to stand on tiptoe to be seen by the vendor. She waved a 50-rupee note over her head. The man reached out, took her money, gave her a long look, got a packet of bread rolls from his rack and handed it to her, then a plastic cup of tea. "Why doesn't she come back?" Vidya said. "She's got what she wanted, hasn't she? I should never have let her go. A foreign child." "She was hardly asking your permission," Latika said. It feels long, but it's only been, she checked her watch, 2 minutes. They saw the girl walk past them on the platform with her tea and bread. When she veered left to where the ragged woman had reappeared, they realized she must have bought the food for her. The girl went up to the woman and held out the packet. The woman didn't notice her, so the girl tapped her elbow. Latika saw the famished gaze on them of 2 men idling on the platform. She drew a sharp breath, shook her head to dismiss her sense of foreboding, told herself not to be melodramatic, then saw one of the men sidle closer to the girl. He was leering and saying something to her. She paid him no attention. As if by mistake, still grinning, he brushed an arm against her breasts. The girl stepped backward, and in a single move that appeared to take no more than a second, she thrust the bread at the woman and flung the hot tea in the man's face. She kicked his shin and his crotch as his hands flew to his face. The man stumbled, fell to the platform. All of a sudden, as if watching a silent film, the women in the train saw the food stall starting to slide backwards. The lamppost by the stall moved 2 feet back, then 3. They saw the girl turning around to see her train moving out of the platform. The girl running towards the train, very fast despite her backpack, running as if her life depended on it, the second of the 2 men running after her. The crowds on the platform obliterated them for a moment, then they reappeared. They saw them falling further and further behind, and Gauri let out an anguished cry. What is she going to do? What is she going to do? Pull the chain, we should pull the chain. This was Latika, who had jumped out of her seat. They looked above their heads to where the emergency brake pole should have been, and saw that it was hanging loose from the wall, its spring broken.
I won't spoil what happens. I wanted to ask you if you were conscious of your novels as political, or to what extent you think of yourself as an artist who's engaged in doing work that is political.
I don't think I think of myself as a political writer at all, but I can see that, of course, the social and political world that surrounds you sort of seeps in through the crevices and becomes part of what you write, and it becomes a response to those things in many ways. So this book is certainly a response to the violence we currently and for some time against women that we have been seeing in India, and which is deeply and horribly disturbing. So in that sense, I suppose it is political, and all the books have been political in different ways, but I just don't think of myself as, and I am not an activist of any kind. I don't think of myself as.
It made me think of Alice Munro, actually, who
I love Alice Munro.
Who I think is a novelist or a short story writer, really, who is often sort of mistaken as somebody who's a domestic miniaturist, but she actually, those stories are always about the war and about
one
the
of the things I love about Alice Munro is also her sense of not endings.
Yes.
And I was delighted to read an interview, Pedro Almodovar about Julieta, where he said that when you read an Alice Munro story, the characters become, instead of getting to know them better, they become stranger and stranger as you go along until in the end you have no idea what happened in a way.
That's
and
kind of
which
true,
is
right?
what makes you go on thinking about it.
Right.
And of course, she has always been mistaken for a housewife who writes in her spare time and so on. And in that sense, yes, I would not see myself at all as someone writing a book to make a point, but every line you write is political in some way. And the private lives of people and how the lives of women and children are within spaces like homes or orphanages or temples.
I think you're being needlessly modest, because I think you actually confronted very clearly, like in Atlas, you talk very clearly about, you dramatize what happened in India during partition in a very miniature way, but in a very powerful way, and that's what makes it so effective. And in Jupiter, the entire catalyst for the plot, which is not even clear until much later in the book, is displaced people, right?
Yeah.
And so I think you are more political than you're giving yourself credit for, because you don't want to be, because I think we have one idea of what an activist novelist does.
Yeah.
But I think, as you said,
I think it's because when I'm reading a book, what I am really looking for almost above anything else is the language. And I can read books where absolutely nothing happens as long as they are wonderfully written.
Right.
Of course, some things have to
happen.
But one of the books Graywolf published, which was called Out Stealing Horses, it's Norwegian called, but very little happens in that. It's set in a little forest in Norway where one very dramatic thing has already happened. But it's so beautifully well, in this case, translated. And I love writers like Yasunari Kawabata, this Japanese writer, who wrote a book called The Sound of the Mountain, which actually is about an old man. You're right, there must be something old people in it. But it's this man who looks out of his window, I think, some early morning in a kind of suburb of Tokyo, and hears the mountain. I mean, he can actually hear a rumble from somewhere deep in the earth. And he immediately knows that this is death. It's his own mortality he's listening to. And over the course of that novel, through a very series of very little things, he has an attraction towards his daughter-in-law, which is never explicit. It's just tiny things that. But I really love books where, through a set of events that appear insignificant, you reach some very much deeper, profounder meaning, so that there is nothing explicitly political about it, and yet it is.
I'm curious if there are certain writers that you cite as the most important to you as novelists.
I think these three would be certainly. There is one Bengali writer who wrote the book which is translated as The Song of the Road. And it was made into a film by Satyajit Ray. The Apu trilogy is, the first one is The Song of the Road, which is set in a tiny village in Bengal, and two children are growing up there in extreme poverty, and yet with a great sense of joy in their surrounding, which brings them, they don't experience it as unhappiness at all, or poverty. And when I was writing Atlas, which has two children, what I really wanted was to capture the spirit of those children in that book. And I made although I'm Bengali and I spoke Bengali at home, I never learned to read it, but I made myself learn to read it in order to read this book.
If there are people in the audience who have never seen Bengali script, it is incredibly,
I knew a bit of the script, but I had to really work.
My parents are Bengali, and my mother could not read it, and could barely write it. She's a physician. I think it's not uncommon for even very literate people to not have a total handle on that language, And when I decided I would teach myself Bengali, my friends in Calcutta, I had lately moved to Calcutta, they had a good time last year. And when they saw, so I said, I marched off and even bought a dictionary, Bengali, to a stack of books, and they all found it hugely amusing. But it's taken a long time, but now I can read at a good speed, which makes me feel so like. That's very impressive. That's very impressive. The last thing that I was really curious about is if you are conscious of having a particular attachment to or relation to homes. There is something about the physical idea of home, an actual building and walls, that recurs in the work. It seems very significant in Jupiter that they are in a hotel, and there's something about the young girl in the book is in the hotel, and the older lady is running a hostel, which is next door, and there's a lot of sort of flavor in that. And There's the ashram, which we haven't even really got to.
Most of the characters don't have an actual home
And
in Jupiter.
yes, and in Atlas, one of the more arresting images that you open the book with is of a home being sort of swallowed up by a river.
Yeah.
Is there some connection that you have to physical homes in your own life, or is that just something you're interested in as an artist?
No, I think one of the things that affected me very deeply and led to Atlas in some ways was that we had a very beautiful old home in Calcutta. It's one of those normal things that happen in big cities, that the home gets divided and subdivided between cousins, and finally there's no one there to repair it.
Yeah.
So it was falling down and it had to be knocked down, and very practical apartments were made in its place.
Mm-hmm.
But that really, I think, just destroyed me for some time, losing that house. And that's certainly what prompted parts of Atlas to happen. Yeah.
Oh, that's a satisfying answer as a reader, because when I was reading, especially in Atlas of Impossible Longing, there's a subplot that's around the partition of India, and central to that plot is a physical home and what happens, into whose hands this home falls. Yeah. And there is something very sort of specific.
So you know, when I finished the book, and some friends asked my husband, so what is her book about? Have you read it? And he thought, he's a publisher, he should have read it.
And your husband. So
and
he should have a good answer.
So he thought for a long time, and he said, it's about housing problems.
It's not untrue. It's not the whole truth, but. Are you trying to signal to us? Oh.
Yeah.
It's fine if you are. No, it's fine if you are. 5 minutes?
Can I just ask you one thing which intrigued me?
Yes, please do.
Which is that I felt while reading, I was, at the moment I read that bit where these two girlfriends are talking about their past, or remembering their past, and remembering how when they were children, or teenagers, they would leave each other and 5 minutes later be on the phone or one of those old phones which would grow hot against their ears. How much of this is a biography of both New York as well as a certain pre-internet growing up?
Certainly, yes, that is a very astute observation. I think that there is I'm 39, and I think there was a different, intimacy still exists, of course, but the ways in which kids were intimate with one another in the period of my youth had to do with like a hot telephone receiver. And I just wanted to capture that, to get at that, and it's the kind of thing that resonates with people, readers of a certain age. And I'm sure a reader in her 20s would be like, I don't even know what you're talking about now, because technology has changed so quickly. But there is
in this book has a mobile phone.
You know what? You caught me in a terrible thing, which is that I hate writing about cell phones. I think it's a very inelegant word, and the ways in which we use it are very inelegant, and they're so connected to everyday life that to even break up a sentence and say someone is using their phone now seems incorrect. And so the book I'm writing now is actually set in the 1980s, in large part to avoid having to address.
But when you're writing, it really is the story of the city as well, isn't it?
It was a challenge for me to write about New York, because it's a city that is written about so much, and it was interesting to hear you talk about making a place up. You get a little liberty. So I talk a lot about, I describe a lot of real places, actual intersections in the book, but I don't really name where they are. Okay. And I've had people say to me, oh, I know what street that is, and they've been incorrect. Which I sort of like, because it makes me feel that it's sort of fixed and not fixed, that it can belong to me as the intersection of Dean Street and whatever, but it can belong to the reader as the intersection of wherever she wants it to be.
And these women go off on a bachelorette party, and to my intense frustration, you don't tell us where they went.
Oh, I will tell you.
No
yes, they go to Turks and Caicos, but I didn't want to fix it as a real place. So, and I wonder if you do this too. I make things up in real detail for myself.
Oh yeah.
And then I just erase the detail that I don't want to be there. So when I was plotting this book out finally, I figured out what their birthdays were, like the day they were born, what days of the week that would have been, and all of this stuff that is only interesting to me. And it's not,
Yeah.
you have to know what.
But you need to.
You need to know that stuff, right?
Yeah.
If anybody has any questions, I know Anuradha is happy to take them.
On the web, your first name is spelled 2 different ways.
No, I'm not Arundhati. I'm Anuradha. They're two different names. They're two very common Indian names.
And so your spelling of your name is what?
Anuradha.
Perfect. So you're not A-R-U-N-D-H-A-T-I.
No, I wish I were.
Why?
Well, she got lots of money with the Booker Prize. There was a lady I was reading in Marin County in San Francisco a couple of days ago. And somebody really very old on a walker, she made a great effort to come. And she held out Arundhati's book.
Oh
and
God.
I thought I can't do this to her. She's made a big, so I just didn't say a word. I just signed A. Roy and
we were on vacation this summer. I have 2 young sons, and there was like a rainy day. We were at the beach. There was a rainy day, so we went to this bookstore. And my son was so excited that they had a copy of my book, and he was like, "I'm gonna sign your book." And I was like, "Nobody wants that." But he was only 6, and I was like, "Okay, we'll just sign this one." So somewhere there's a signed copy of my book. Something like that.
I once had somebody in a reading in Italy who stood in a long queue, and then he came up to me and actually, I get this, I know how people look at her. That's a weird feeling.
Yeah.
So he looked at me very intensely and shook my hand and said, "I've stood in this line just to shake your hand because I so admire your stand on Palestine."
Yeah, what are the odds that you would have a name so similar?
Yeah,
So,
I
you know.
should have thought.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I know. She's lucky.
Will you be telling all these stories?
Do you have a question?
I do have a question. I'm curious about whether or not you did much research when writing this book, and if you did, how you used the research to inform your writing as opposed to to over.
I think I did, of course. I had to read up lots of legal cases, I went to lots of dark chat rooms, I did a whole bunch of things because this was not a world I was familiar with. But with research, I always find that you have to do quite a lot, but not too. I really don't like doing too much research.
It's a sweet spot, right?
Yeah. At some point, you just have to push it aside and let it be, and then just do your stuff and not think about it at all anymore. I mean, you should. I would never look at notes and write. It has to be sort of buried inside you by the time you're writing the book.
Was there a particular, not to go back to it,
Yeah.
you can just tell me later if you want,
Okay.
but there is at the heart of Sleeping on Jupiter a plot we didn't even really discuss that about a holy man who's sort of a charlatan, and was there a real life analog that you were working from, or was it sort of an idea that you had?
Well, there are many
There are
many such. So I wasn't working from any particular case.
Yeah.
But unfortunately,
But when you talk
there
about the
are-
research, that's what you were
yeah,
looking at, yeah. Okay.
There are, there is one guy, very famous Godman, in jail even right now,
Yeah.
because a girl accused him of raping her many times, and his disciples, whenever he's brought out for a hearing, his multitudes of disciples come and try to disrupt the proceedings so that, because they are convinced this kind of person is considered an incarnation almost
Right.
of the divine.
Right.
So they can't imagine that anything should be disallowed or any rules applied.
Right.